morning. Welcome to our home. I'm Henry Harrison McCloskey. I was the original owner and of course the builder of the castle. It was back in 1908. I was the attorney for the Ocean Shore Railroad, which was a project here on the coast side. My wife and I lost our home in the earthquake in 1906, and it was devastated, as was my law practice and my office. And so we decided to move somewhere where it would be safe. And certainly the coast side I was familiar with because it was basically raw land except for a few cottages down by the ocean side. And so we bought this property in Sharp Park and built the castle here to resemble the home that she had grown up in. She being Emily, and our 4 children lived there at the same time. Built it in 1908. And we were able to build it within 1 year's time. And I built it for her because she basically was considering going back to Scotland, where she grew up in a castle. And I suggested, well, if we build an earthquake-proof home, and I design it, have it designed as if it were a castle, would she be more comfortable? And she, of course, said she would. And so I had local merchants and architects help in the design and the creation of the home for her. We had 20 rooms, 7 bedrooms, overlooking the magnificent Pacific Ocean. And so it was designed as if it were a Scottish castle to help my wife's memories of Scotland. But it was not outsourced. It was built here, designed here. The concrete that was to look like the castle in Scotland, that was manufactured here. The wood was milled on the coast side. The lumber was grown. The redwood for the trimmings and the panels were built and created in the coastside area. And we moved here in 1908, but I died in 1914 while arguing a case in court in San Francisco. So I don't know much about the history afterwards except what I've been told from some of the spirits who roam around the castle from time to time.
Good afternoon. I'm Emily McCloskey, and this castle was built for me by my dear sainted husband, Henry Harrison McCloskey. He built it because, well, we had a home in San Francisco, and one night I experienced a terrible I was involved in the San Francisco earthquake, and Henry, he was away on a business trip, and I was at the Palace Hotel. Do you know where the Palace is? It was down on Market Street. I believe it's still there today. But nevertheless, I was at the Palace Hotel. It was about 5 in the morning, and all of a sudden I was thrown violently onto the carpet. And the chandeliers were shaking, and the ceiling was cracking, and the floors were swaying, and I ran out into the streets, and oh my goodness, there was fires, and then the streets opened up, and the water shot up, and it was, the vermin got out. I've never seen such a thing. It was absolutely frightening. And the ships at Kearney Harbor, they were all on fire. We couldn't put the fires out, and when finally Henry caught up with me, I told him that I want to go away from San Francisco. I don't ever want to go back to San Francisco. And I wanted to go back to Scotland. For I come from Scotland. I come from Perth, which is the gateway to the Highlands. And we had wonderful times back in Scotland. But nevertheless, Henry talked me into staying. And the only thing that he did to make me stay, he built me a beautiful castle in Salada Beach. I believe now it's called Pacifica, but in those days it was Salada Beach. And he walked me up into the top of a hill, and I looked out and I thought I saw Japan, and I thought, what a wondrous sight. They tell me it was the Farallon Islands, but nevertheless it was just as good. And Henry took his money and he built this wondrous castle for me, and the pilings are so deep into the ground that this hill will go before this building will go. He built it like my beloved Bendermere, my family castle in the Highlands of Scotland, and I was so thankful. And our 4 children, we lived here, and we didn't live here very, very long. For Henry, he wouldn't take his medicine. And of course, he always had too much salt and his Irish temper. He dropped dead in court arguing a case one day. That was in 1914. And so therefore, I found myself a widow. And I needed to go back to Scotland. I couldn't stay here with my children. I just I didn't know what to do. So I sold my beloved Windermere, and I sold it to a lovely lady, Minerva Paul Hickok. Her husband was a physician. She lived in Berkeley, and I thought, this is a wonderful thing that I'm doing. However, I found out that Dr. Hickok wasn't the man that I thought he was. And I'm afraid that his experience in our beloved Windermere was just one series of checkered events that occurred since we had lived in Windermere. And all I can say is that it's hard being responsible for what you do, and harder to be responsible for what your children do. But it's impossible to be responsible for what the people you sell your beloved home to do.
Hi, I'm Dr. Galen Hickok. My family owned the castle from 1914 to 1922, and we operated it as a clinic. Because back then it was a great remote place. There were no other houses around. Pacifica wasn't even Pacifica, hardly any houses down there. It was difficult, it was remote, and a great place for a clinic. And but in December of 1920, the police raided the house. Now, I wasn't here that night, but they found 2 nurses, 2 attendants, and several young women, the youngest of whom was 14. In their official statement to the police, they said that they were here because they were unwilling to become mothers. Well, the police took the house apart. They found a surgery downstairs, and they claimed I was performing illegal abortions. They brought some local citizens in. They dug the whole yard looking for bones. They were delighted when they found some, and deflated when they found that they were cats and squirrels and rabbits. But they took it to trial. 12 men on the jury, because women couldn't vote back then, and they certainly couldn't sit on juries. They found me guilty and sentenced me to 2 to 5 in San Quentin. You know how long the jury was out? 7 minutes. Some deliberation. When I was in there, my son took over the practice. The police hounded him. They sent him to San Quentin too. There's no record of us after we got out of there. Maybe we went to another state and changed our names and kept the same thing going again. I'm not saying. Sorry.
I'm Frank Winston from the Historical Society. We have a couple of introductions and presentations, and then we'll be hearing from Pete McCloskey, whose grandfather, of course, built this establishment.
So thank you very much for coming to celebrate the centennial year of the Castle on the Hill in Pacifica. And a big thank you to the Pacifica Historical Society for making this evening possible. I can't tell you how many volunteer hours were put in to organize and make sure this all came together, and the tours that are forthcoming this weekend and next weekend. I'm very pleased tonight to represent the Sam Mazza Foundation, whose donor, the late Mr. Sam Mazza, owned this castle for over 50 years. Many of you here tonight knew him, perhaps even attended other castle functions over the years. He was a man with a strong sense of individualism, independence, and much charisma, as you well know. He would be so proud to see the community gather to celebrate this historic moment. The Sam Mazza Foundation is a relatively new charitable entity with a board of directors that is proud and eager to carry out the philanthropic endeavors made possible by this organization. The Sam Mazza Foundation has made a commitment to this historic building, to keep it standing strongly on this hillside to serve a greater purpose in Pacifica, the coastal community, and the Bay Area. Many talented hands have been working long and hard toward this goal. Much skilled work remains invisible, a silent strength within the walls, the beams, and floors of this notable structure. Yet, the beautiful interior restoration that's begun in the upstairs wing has brought a regal focus to this magical manor. I would like to thank at this time our illustrious and intuitive interior designer, Mr. Scott Cunningham of Scott Cunningham Designs in San Francisco. He is the man of the hour, and so many people have been remarking of the beauty that surrounds us and the changes that are very obvious, especially to those of us who've been coming to this castle for some time now. His keen eye and ease of perseverance has brought a well-deserved refurbishment to this grand manor in her 100th year. So we're very appreciative. So from all of us, a great thank you for being here, and please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you. From Assembly Member Gene Mullen's office, we have a special guest representing him. And that's Chris Hunter, who knows more about the history than almost anyone here. Chris.
Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here. I've spent a lot of time over the years in this castle. I got the good fortune of getting to know Sam pretty well. I brought my two daughters here once. I'll just tell you one castle story. Brought my two daughters up here once, and Sam gave us a personal tour. And then he sat on the throne with my two little daughters and him, with the girls on his lap, and I have some pictures of that. And then he went downstairs to what's called the dungeon, and he pulled out a couple of bottles of champagne. He was an amazingly interesting man and a big laugher. He enjoyed life so much and gave a lot of inspiration to a lot of people I know because of that. And on behalf of Assembly Member Gene Mullen, I just have an assembly certificate, Pacifica's Castle, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the unique coastside landmark. So it's a pleasure to be here.
State Senator Leland Yee.
On behalf of the California State Senate, let me present this resolution, the Pacifica Historical Society Castle. This is just a wonderful, wonderful place. And one thing serious is that one of the ways in which we help our children to grow is not only to educate them about what's going on right now, but also their history, the culture of what their city was all about, their areas. And having this castle and having this society helps our children in Pacifica really understand where they came from, who they're about, and most importantly, how they grew up in this particular area. So I am just really so thrilled to have this society, have this castle be part of the life of our children here in Pacifica. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I'm not here to present a certificate or a resolution. I'm here to present a proclamation. I'm here both as a Pacifican and as a representative of Congresswoman Jackie Spear, and although she's not able to make it, she wanted to make sure that her proclamation was seen today, so all I'm going to do to you is read it. Congresswoman Jackie Spear proudly celebrates 100 years of the Pacifica Castle. Since being built by Henry Harrison McCloskey in 1908, this enduring peninsula landmark has fed the dreams of generations of children. Through its many incarnations, the castle has been a home, studio, gathering place, and fortress. Now, thanks to the generosity of Sam Mazza and the Mazza Foundation, it remains a community icon and local treasure. All right.
In welcoming Pete, some of you may know a little bit about him, and I will share only a little bit. He grew up in Southern California, went to law school at Stanford, and was in the same classrooms as William Rehnquist, who became Chief Justice, and Sandra Day O'Connor, who became Associate Justice. Pete only became a world figure as a congressperson, and in 1970 as the creator of Earth Day for the nation. He's been a friend of this community, and he has personal ties to the castle. As most of you know, and he will share some stories, his grandfather built the castle, Henry Harrison McCloskey. But Pete's focus today is on his family and Sam Mazza. You probably have recognized Sam Mazza's eclectic personality by all the things he has acquired, and Pete knows something about how they were acquired, some in very unusual ways. but it's my pleasure to welcome back to the Pacifica Historical Society, to the city of Pacifica, to the castle where he began his political career in 1967, and the rest of the story will be told by my good friend, our good friend, Pete Klopsky. Pete.
Well, let me first thank whoever put on this party and whoever dreamed up the food and the drink and the champagne. And I've never seen this castle like this, but let me tell you what I know about the castle, and for perhaps some historical reasons. My father was 15 at the time of the earthquake in 1906, and my grandfather had been an attorney. He'd represented the Ocean Shore Railroad, the Filling Salt Company. He was well known in San Francisco. My dad lived in the turret up there. He said it was terribly cold in a mist like this. There was no heat in the building. These rocks that you see, there are 3 steel rods. When my grandfather was burned out of the earthquake, he determined to build something that would never fall down. This castle will be here long after the City Hall in San Francisco has passed into dust. There are 3 steel rods going through these bricks, horizontal, vertical, straight up and down. So this thing is going to be here forever. But I probably would never have been elected to Congress, but for Sam Matson. So I decided to run for Congress, and nobody gave me a chance. And my dad said, you know, up in Pacifica, my father built that castle. So he somehow found Sam Matson, and they agreed to hold my first political fundraising party in this castle. And it was one hell of a party. You have to imagine Sam Matson. You know, his profession was storing relics and props for the theater in San Francisco. And I remember he proudly pointed to me in that corner room over there. He said, now, here is a Catholic crucifix. It was sitting next to a throne that you used in King Lear and the Elizabethan, the Shakespeare plays. And he says, this is Sally Stanford's bed from her famous brothel in Sausalito. Well, that was interesting, but we had a party second only to this one, and my staff kept saying, quit going up to Pacifica. And I said, listen, they said, it's all Democrat, no Republican ever carried Pacifica. And when I kept going up these ravines door to door, and I'll tell you, you have some of the most, or had, maybe probably still, some of those interesting characters in America living up these ravines. I don't know how much marijuana is grown up there anymore, but I can tell you down in the county, this was a lost sheep. The sheriff very seldom came up to me, or came up to Pacifica. It was an independent community. Where's the mayor? When I got elected, an old gentleman came up to me, and he was an old gentleman, he kind of portly, and he said, Congressman, he said, I used to have the California Highway Patrol run up the coast, and once a week, and that's the only time we patrolled Highway 1, I would come up the coast, and I was always stop at your grandfather's castle and talk with the madam. And he would have coffee with the lady that ran the whorehouse, and and I'm not sure what years that were. Is there anybody here old enough to have attended that establishment? Who was the one that used the word, this is an establishment? It was. Yes, you're right.
I am Dottie Fine, the Madam of Chateau Lafayette, the little roadhouse of Pacifica. From 1922 to 1924, we had a lot of wonderful parties here, and a lot of bootleg booze, because it was year of Prohibition. And it was just a fun time. I had about 25 girls, and we dined and danced, and that was our little brothel of Pacifica. And we had bootleg booze coming in from all the ships that would come in and supply us with their booze for the evening. And then a lot of traffic up and down the hill, which the police did not care for. So they came in one night and said, sure, come on in, guys. We can set you up with dinner, dancing, have a great party, which they did. And then, you know, a few years later, they found our tunnel out here, and they dammed it up. And we could not get any more booze from there, but we weren't licked yet. We went up in the hills. And they had stills up there, so we were able to get our bootleg booth and brought it in to supply our customers and continue our business until 1924. Then they chased us out, and that's when the doctor came in. And I'm sorry, I lost all of my girls, and that was the end of our little Pacifica brothel.
I'm the ghost of Lydia Comerford Fahey. I lived in the big yellow house down on the ocean, just directly down below the castle. I lived about the same time as the McCloskeys. But our paths crossed in several ways. First, when they started to put the railroad through, came up to our property, which went from the ocean up to where Oceana School is now, and maybe even up above. They hadn't negotiated with us. So all of a sudden here these crews showed up at my boundary, at my fence, and in those days there's no phone. What could I do? I got out the shotgun and I said, the first person who steps on my property gets shot. So they backed down, and then they later sent someone down to negotiate, and then there was some compensation, and then the railroad went through. And I was known for doing something very similar a little later. The PG&E decided and was encouraged to bring electricity down to the coast side. But when they got to my property, which I guess maybe was the first larger piece of property that they came to down here, I realized they hadn't negotiated with us either. So this time though, I got out the surveyor's maps, and I pointed out to them that this was my property and where the lines were, and until we had some negotiating more about it, they could not step on my property. And so they went away, and then we had some negotiating and some compensation, and then the electricity came down to the coast side. Our house was a very interesting house. It was built before the turn of the century. And our father always kept a kerosene light glowing in the window to help with the ships for navigation. And we had more than one ship captain come to our house and thank us for this. I think there might be a nice little love story here too, but we'll have to look into it, because Mrs. Fahey lived down at the ocean, and Mr. Fahey, whom she married, lived in the back of this Sharp Park area. Their house is still here, and they eventually married. Unfortunately, he died early, and she was left a widow. So she was, for many years, a person on her own. She was known as a very strong person. She was very much involved with the community and church. Let's see now, there are some more, and there are so many wonderful stories about her, but we're going to have to tell more of them later. Wait. Look at it. They got more yard than kids here.
Well, my dad lived here till he was 16, and he would, every morning, he would hike up the hill and catch the trolley to downtown San Francisco, where he went to Lowell High School, graduated, I think, in 1912. But it's a thing in the family that was preserved by a marvelous man named Sam Mazza, who bought it, used it as a storehouse for the props for plays in San Francisco, stage plays. He had thrones, he had Sally Stanford's bed, he had Catholic crucifixes, he had revolving red lights, and Sam filled this house with really historical relics, of many of whom are here today. But as I say, it's 100 years since my grandfather built this, and I never knew him. He died in 1916. And I never really knew much about the castle, but my dad told me when I ran for Congress in 1967. I was probably elected to Congress because the marvelous party Sam Mazza held for me. We had my first effort in politics, and from that send off here in Pacifica, I may have been the last Republican ever to carry Pacifica, and now I've become a Democrat in horror at what the Republican Party has recently become.
I have here for Pete prepared through a title company and through Jerry Crow, one of our archivists, a complete history and title report of the castle.
All right. I thank you because I was glad to finally learn who the doctor was that ran the abortion. But who owned it when it was a brothel?
It'll be in there.
It'll be in there.
Barbara can tell you.
The Hewitts.
Huh?
The M.L. Hewitts.
Is he alive today?
No. It was a
Is there
man-
anybody
a man
alive
in
here
black.
today who visited it when it was a Thank you.
Okay, continue on with the party. Thank you very much, Pete.
An interesting place, actually. So, funny for me, every time I go up and down the stairs, for some reason, that's when it clicks home, and I feel it. That in the last 100 years, you've had congressman's grandfather, you've had a convicted abortion doctor, you've had pregnant young women, you've had madams, prostitutes, you've had the Coast Guard, rum runners, gun runners. Everybody's gone up and down that stairs and held that handrail, and it just brings the history of it. There were some kids in here a little while ago, and they walked off, and I said, "Don't forget all these ghosts."